Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Osteoporosis Canada's webinar, Skillet Perogy Shepherd's Pie, in partnership with thinkbeef.ca. My name is Tracie Napoli, and I'm the Director of Fund Development and MARCOM at Osteoporosis Canada, and I will be your webinar host. We are also streaming live on Osteoporosis Canada's Facebook page, so a big welcome to everyone watching on Facebook Live. This presentation will provide general information about cooking and food knowledge. It is not intended as individualized health or nutrition advice. If you have questions about nutrition, consult a physician or registered dietitian. If you have questions during the cooking demonstration, you can easily enter your questions by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. In addition to answering some of your questions that were submitted in advance, we will also attempt to answer those submitted during this live webinar with time available. Nutrition plays an important role in overall bone health and in preventing and managing osteoporosis. When planning meals, include foods with bone-building nutrients like calcium and protein, and be sure to take a vitamin D supplement daily. Calcium is one of the key minerals that makes bone hard, and vitamin D ensures our bodies can absorb enough calcium. Osteoporosis Canada recommends including protein daily in your diet to benefit muscle and bone health. For overall health, Canada's Food Guide recommends including protein foods at every meal. Some examples are beef, eggs, fish, poultry, tofu, legumes, nuts, milk, yogurt, and cheese. Beef has many essential nutrients packed into each serving, providing nutrients that are difficult to get from other foods like iron, zinc, and vitamin B12. Let's begin today's cooking demo with the featured recipe, Skillet Perogy Shepherd Pie, with 7 grams of protein and 175 milligrams of calcium per serving. You can find today's featured recipe and other recipes by visiting osteoporosis.ca/recipes. Also know that this is being recorded and you'll be able to watch it on the OC Replay webpage in 48 hours after we end this webinar. It's now my pleasure to welcome Emily Richards, professional home economist, freelance food writer, chef, and cookbook author who enjoys culinary instruction for home cooks who want to learn more and have fun in the kitchen. Emily is the author and co-author of 9 cookbooks and also writes and develops recipes for print and online publications that include everyday cooking and healthy eating. You can see Emily share her passion for food at consumer shows, radio and television appearances, and on webcasts just like this one. Please welcome Emily. Hi, Emily.
Emily, I'm going to remember to unmute myself. There we go. That's the tricky part.
Emily, hi. I think we had a connection issue.
Oh,
can you hear me?
I can hear you now. That's perfect, Tracie. Awesome. So we can get started, right? We can start cooking this wonderful Tuesday afternoon. All right, so we are making a delicious Skillet Perogy Shepherd's Pie. And the first thing I love to do is get the recipe in front of me, which hopefully you can, if you don't have it in front of you like I do, you can always go to the website and it is available. So getting things ready for cooking is something that I love to do because it means I get to get organized. So if you see all these lovely dishes in front of me, that's my mise en place. And that's to get, this recipe is super quick. It will be done in under 30 minutes at home. And the reason being is because I have all this mise en place ready. And the bonus is a lot of this stuff you may actually have in your freezer, in your pantry. And that's what makes it such a wonderful dish to cook. So the first thing that we're going to do is talk a little bit about that base flavor for our shepherd's pie. And if you've made shepherd's pie before, you know that it's typically topped with mashed potatoes, sometimes sweet potatoes, which is a wonderful family meal. We're changing it up by using pierogi, so still having those potatoes on hand, just in a slightly different way. All right, so let's get cooking. And I'm gonna start off with kind of the flavor base of this dish, and that is the onions and the garlic. And we are actually cooking everything together with our ground beef. And that's what kind of speeds things along. We are using a lean ground beef today. And that is wonderful because that means I don't have to spend any time worrying about draining the fat because there's very little fat in it. So I'm going to be using that to my benefit to add flavor to the dish. So I'm going to get started with a little bit of just a neutral oil, whatever you happen to have at home. And I'm going to be cooking over medium-high heat to get things going, okay? And I'm using, in the recipe, you'll notice it says a heat-proof skillet. So what does that mean? This is getting finished off in the oven. So if you have a handle that maybe it's an older skillet, it has a firm plastic handle or a wood handle, make sure that you wrap it with some foil before it gets to the oven, okay? And I'll show you my other skillet that I have. I did actually have to wrap it, but this one is completely oven proof. So it's gonna go right into the oven with no problem. Now, I'm gonna get started with that onion. So this is just a regular cooking onion that I'm using. If you don't happen to have a regular onion, you could use a leek here, would be absolutely delicious. We wanna talk a little bit about kind of what you have on hand and the fact that having things in your pantry makes things easier. So I talked about having your mise en place ready. So obviously it's going to, once the recipe gets cooking, it comes together much quickly. But having those ingredients in your pantry is sometimes the most difficult part. So you've selected this recipe, this is what you want to make, and you need to have those ingredients on hand to make it, okay? I'm also going to add some garlic. So onions and garlic are great flavor boosters and starters to so many recipes. This has 4 cloves of garlic. So I love garlic and I love having that flavor here. So if you think that 4 cloves is going to be way too much, don't worry. We are cooking it and the flavor is just beautiful. It's a great accompaniment to the beef, okay? Which I'm also going to add right now. So I am using 1 pound. This is a family meal of ground beef. And I feel really lucky because this week, guess what was on sale? Ground beef. So I purchased more than I needed. And I highly recommend this. When I see ground beef on sale, I do kind of bulk up, if you will, and purchase a little bit more. And it's great because it's a great staple to have on hand in the freezer. So some of the other ingredients that we're using today are from the freezer. So I bought 3 pounds, which is 3 meals for my family, which is perfect. I'm also going to add my seasoning here, some dried thyme leaves and dried sage into my beef so that I can start cooking this up. And what I did was I took out the pounds that I needed for the recipe today. I also used another pound because I made extra. We love this recipe. And I have a pound here that is going to go into the freezer, okay? So that I can be sure to have that staple on hand. Ground beef makes beautiful ingredients. It's a beautiful ingredient to make so many recipes. So whether you're making a delicious meat sauce or you wanted to make a simple stir fry with ground beef, it is the base of a lot of great recipes, much like this one. And here's something that maybe you want to try. If you want to kind of get ahead of the game, if you didn't want to just freeze the ground beef as it is, you can actually cook this mixture fully, which is what we're going to do, let it cool completely, and then pop that into the freezer. So now you can be a step ahead and actually make this recipe that much quicker because you'll pull it from the freezer, and then what will happen is you'll just start cooking it from frozen and continue on with the recipe. So it is a fabulous ingredient to have on hand, okay? Now, if you're thinking, I don't have ground beef, but I made a roast beef on the weekend and I have some leftover roast beef, you could totally use that here. Just chop it up and cook it in with the onions and the garlic. It's a great way to use up leftovers. Another thing you could use if you had a few steaks in the freezer, just chop them up really small. And I would use the tender cuts, the grilling cuts, like a strip loin or a ribeye would be great here. And then just quickly cook it with the onions and garlic because that will retain its nice tenderness and the flavor will be there. And it'll just be a slightly different texture, but it will be absolutely delicious, I promise you. So what I'm doing here as I'm cooking ground beef, I want to make sure that I'm breaking it up as I'm cooking it for 2 reasons. I don't want kind of bigger chunks of the ground beef together. And I also want to make sure that it's no longer pink. So that's the great part about using ground beef. I know that once it's browned, it's cooked. And the other bonus, it's in the title. It's one skillet. I'm only going to have one skillet to clean at the end of all of this. And the dishes, they'll get in the dishwasher, so I don't have to worry about those. So you can take a look in my pan, and in about 4 or 5 minutes, the beef is cooked, okay? And I've just broken up kind of some of those smaller pieces. And if you're not an expert chopper, if you chop the onions a little bit bigger, so the recipe calls for diced onions and minced garlic. If it's a little bit bigger, just cook it a little bit longer, because what you want is the flavor of the onion, but you want it to be nice and tender in the dish as well. So that's where chopping it a little bit smaller helps. Just cooks a little quicker. So with my beef browned, another great freezer staple that I have on hand all the time, frozen vegetables. This is just mixed frozen vegetables, carrots, corn, peas, some beans in there. If you're not a bean fan, you could use carrots and peas. That's a great combination. Let's say you only have corn. Frozen corn will work. Now, what I did do is I thawed this slightly just to kind of speed things up a bit. If you pull it right out of the freezer, no problem. It will still work. Okay, so I'm going to just stir that in. And this is where we get our veggies. We get some beautiful color in here. And if you don't have frozen vegetables in your freezer, but you have some leftover roasted vegetables from last night's dinner, it's perfect in here. Just chop them up and stir them in. It's 2 cups that you need, okay? So far, is it looking like shepherd's pie? I think so, pretty close. All right, so I'm stirring that in. And this is where I'm just going to turn this off for a second, because I'm going to do a little switch here, because I want to show you how quick the gravy comes together. And I did say gravy, because I think that's kind of my favorite part about shepherd's pie, is that nice sauciness of the ground beef. So here I have 2 cups of beef broth. Maybe you have it in your pantry. I always keep either stock or broth in my freezer if I've made it, and then I just put it in containers and keep it frozen. Or I have Tetra Paks or canned or little concentrates of beef broth available, so that I can make these recipes come together really quickly. Now, if by chance you didn't have any beef broth at all, you know what you could do with this and add a little bit of extra calcium? You could use 1 cup of water and 1 cup of milk. You'll get an extreme creaminess, and the flavor will be a slightly different, but it'll still taste good, okay? So we need to thicken it up. I'm gonna add some flour, and I'm also gonna add my seasoning. You'll notice I added the thyme and sage to the beef, but I didn't add any salt and pepper, and that's where I'm gonna add it now. So I'm just gonna grab my whisk, which is here. Tracie, do we have any questions that I could answer while I'm whisking away here?
We do have a couple. This is just looking great, and you're giving lots of great tips about how people can stock their freezers with inexpensive items and items that you can find on sale, like frozen vegetables and ground beef. I'm not sure, you're gonna have to help us with this question. Is this something that could be made gluten-free?
Oh,
I know we've got the pierogies.
Question.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. What do you think?
So if you make your own pierogies and make them gluten-free, that would be a great option. And then you have to look for other gluten-free options. So beef broth, definitely, if you're not making your own, you do need to read the label and make sure. I'm just gonna add my salt and pepper in here with my flour, and do make sure that it's gluten-free. I am using a bit of a thickener, flour. So how are you gonna get that thickness? You can simply use a little bit of cornstarch instead of the flour, okay? And cornstarch works a little bit differently, so you don't need as much for the 2 cups of liquid. So what you can use is 1 to 2 tablespoons, and that will vary on the liquid that you use. So if you want to use my idea about milk and water, you could totally do that. But the beef broth, you should be okay with about 1 tablespoon of cornstarch. And what that will do is once you add it, it'll start to thicken up, much like it's going to do with the flour that we're adding, because that will just add a wonderful flavor. I have not personally seen gluten-free pierogies but
Yeah.
I bet you there's a lot of specialty stores that would carry that. So that would take a little bit of research, but that would be the way to go. So hopefully that helps.
Great, thank you.
All right, I'm gonna move my skillet back here because I'm going to add that lovely mixture right into the skillet. So I'm just gonna bring it back up to heat and pour this in, okay? So I've whisked everything in and together. I don't need to whisk it in the skillet now because I took the time to break up the flour in the broth mixture. So now what I want to do is stir this up so that it starts to simmer. Now, obviously, I took it off the heat for a little bit, so it would happen a little bit quicker. So this is going to give us a little bit of time for me to talk about one of my family's favorite ingredients, pierogies. And this is something that I always have in the freezer. I love making pierogies. My grandmother, my background's Italian, and we used to call them parahe. And I know that's different, and that's what it's called in different cultures. And she made awesome pierogies. I am not that good. I'm going to keep practicing, I promise. But as a staple, I always have a bag in the freezer because I love using it in different ways. And this is a great example of it, to use it differently. I did want to talk about the pierogies because if you are a pierogi lover and you boil them and toss them with butter, maybe toss them with a little bit of bacon and onion, they're delicious that way. The texture of the pierogies is a little bit different when you cook them in a different way. So normally in water, you'd take them out and drain them. Here, they're actually keeping the moisture from the freezer and adding it to the dish as well. So the texture is a little bit more like a pasta as opposed to that softer dumpling-like texture if you're used to having them boiled. So I always like letting people know that because, or if you've ever done any sheet pan dinners with pierogies, the texture is a little bit different. So it's always good to get the heads up, okay? So if you take a look in my skillet, you can see it's already starting to thicken up. And this would be delicious right now, absolutely delicious. You could serve this with some rice if you wanted to for a quick skillet supper as well. You could add rice into this. You could go traditional and use those mashed potatoes with the addition of some milk in there to make them nice and creamy. But we are going to add those pierogies, okay? So I have 24 pierogies. If you're wondering how much that is, it's one package, which is about 2 pounds. Most packages do have a little bit more than 24 in there. So if you have a large enough skillet, you can nestle them in there really well. I like to make, or try to anyway, make a little bit of a design here and go the same way. So I'm going to start on the outer edge. I'm also turning this down so that it's not bubbling too much. We just kind of want a gentle simmer. And I'm kind of nestling, if you see, I'm just kind of tucking them right in there so that they are going to cook into that lovely gravy and beef mixture that we have, okay? And I always love that word, nestle. It's like kind of tucking in before bedtime. So that's gonna go right in there. And I'm doing it so that they're all kind of lying flat. They all have their own space. And that is really to help them cook nice and evenly, okay? So that they do need that little bit of space. I did mention it at the beginning, but the recipe calls for that. I mentioned the heat-proof skillet, but also slightly deeper. So if you take a look at the depth of my skillet, it's not a lower kind of traditional frying pan, if you will. It does have a little bit of a higher side, and that really helps because this is full. And you want to have space so that nothing is bubbling over, okay? So there, I've tucked them all in. And now you're going to grab your lid, which hopefully will fit comfortably like that, okay? And you're gonna let it simmer away for about 10 to 12 minutes. Now, most packages of pierogies, if you take a look on the outside, it'll tell you the estimated time of cooking, and most of them cook within that 10-minute period. Here, what's great is that because it's kind of nestled in there and the lid will help create some steam, it will be cooking from both sides. If I didn't cover it, I'd have to be turning the pierogies, but I don't have to turn them at all. And You don't have to wait 12 minutes. I would never do that to you. This is what they look like after 12 minutes. So they've plumped up, and I'll move the sauce around a little bit too. You can see on the side here that it's thickened up because we have the added bonus of that little bit of starch from the pierogi dough as well, okay? And we're not done yet, but you just want to make sure that they're nice and tender. So I'm just giving them a little, which is awesome. And it's going to add some color too. So we still have the color of the vegetables. You can see the ground beef popping through here. So we have the addition of some, this is just an old cheddar. You could use marble, whatever you have. Again, whatever you have in the pantry, you can use. Did you know that when cheese is on sale, you could buy extra and freeze that too? You can cut it up into smaller chunks. I like to shred it and then just pop it in the freezer in 1 cup portions. For a recipe like this, it's perfect. I could take it out. I could actually add it frozen to this, and it's going to go under the broiler, which is what I'm going to do right now. Okay, so, oh, and this is the pan I told you about, that heat-proof pan. I needed to wrap this end because it's got a little bit of plastic on it. So just to protect it, I've put a little bit of foil. Now, the other thing that I want to tell you about when it comes to broiling, my broiler was on, so it's ready to go, which will help speed things up. But I've also left a larger distance, so about 6 inches from the top of the broiler. Reason being is that pan is a little bit deeper, and if it's too close, that pan is going to get really hot. And I don't need the pan to get too hot, it's already hot. I need the food to get nice and golden brown and melt that cheese, okay, which is totally what it's going to do. So depending on your broiler, I have a gas broiler, so it can be a little bit tricky. Make sure you keep an eye on it. You can leave the door open a little bit. I usually do because I leave the handle out, depending on the dish that I'm using. But we want to make sure that that cheese is melted beautifully and golden brown. And I can't even tell you how it smells in here. I wish that there was virtual smell that I could send out to you because it smells amazing. All right, I'm going to get a few other things here out, but I do want to keep an eye on my skillet. So the cheese is kind of bubbling away, and I want to make sure that it's melted. Okay, so we talked a little bit about, I told you you could shred the cheese and keep it in the freezer. There's so many things that you can purchase, much like we talked about the ground beef, the frozen vegetables, and keep them available to you so that you can use them a little bit more frequently through the week to make these types of quick meals, okay? And if you're buying them in larger packages, making them smaller and keeping them in the freezer, make sure you label them because that's another one. You don't want to go in there and then find out what you thought was something is something else to make the recipe. So, you know, having that Sharpie is really, really handy to write down when you froze it and also what it is so that you can pull it out in due time. A lot of beef can freeze for a long time, especially when you're purchasing it fresh and then popping it into the freezer. I typically, what I'll do with this one is wrap it in plastic wrap and foil and then stick it into an airtight bag, so a resealable bag, or in a container, and then write on it and put it in the freezer so that I know that that's 1 pound of ground beef that's ready for me to probably make this dish again, because it is a family favorite around here. So that's always a good thing. I'm gonna check and make sure that my cheese is nice and bubbly. It is, there's a little bit of golden brown on my pierogies as well, just like so. And you can see that gravy kind of bubbling around the edges as well, which is a surefire sign of deliciousness. Do you have any other questions for me, Tracie?
Yes, just a couple. A few people I think missed right at the beginning. What are the pierogies filled with? What kind of pierogies are they?
Oh, that I didn't even mention that, did I?
Oh, okay, there you go.
It's perfect. These pierogies are cheese and potato. There's a wide variety. When you're purchasing pierogies, frozen pierogies, there's lots of different fillings. Some are triple cheese, some have bacon in them, some have chives. If you make your own, you can create delicious fillings as well, like mushroom and cheese or spinach. I've seen lots of different varieties. So you select the one that you know your family will love. In my house, cheese and potato is a big winner. And that's what's in today's recipe. But sometimes if they're on sale, I try a different flavor just to, change things up a little bit, which is always really nice. All right, I'm gonna scoop some of this up, Tracie. I know this is always the hardest part for you.
You're gonna have to make the sacrifice and also taste it for us, because that looks amazing. And it was so simple to make.
It is. It's super simple to make. I feel a little bit guilty because it is so simple, but just imagine that this is how simple it is going to be for you as well. And literally the time it takes for you to chop things is about the same amount of time it takes to cook this. So it's not that, I'm not trying to cheat anybody and say that it's difficult. It totally is not. Okay. And I just want you to take a look inside that skillet. You can see how lovely and thick that gravy is. And that's exactly what you're looking for. Now, this on its own is perfect, but if you love, like I do, a little extra toppings on your pierogies, you can still do that. So a little bit of sour cream right on top, or yogurt is another great option here. And then a little sprinkle of some green onions, if you happen to have them. If not, chives would work, or you could leave them off. Even something, if you wanted something green, like parsley would be delicious as well. Okay. And I will taste it because it smells too good to not taste. I just have to grab a fork, Tracie.
You go ahead. We're just going to watch and look how beautiful that is. Don't burn your mouth though. It looks really hot.
It is. So the thing with pierogies, and for those of you that have eaten pierogies, you know this, you want to take a bite because they're ready and delicious, and it's really, really hot inside. So you not only have the rich, wonderful flavor and hotness of the beef, you also have hot pierogies. So you have to be careful. So I'm actually going to take a smaller piece from the inside and also show you that lovely little bit of cheese and pierogi in the filling there, if you can see that. And then I'm going to have some of the beef as well with the beans. This is a great way to get your kids to eat vegetables when you're cooking things in the ground beef. If they're not big fans of vegetables, this is just a great way to kind of get them going and enjoy it, because it is a lovely color and it is a nice texture with the ground beef when you're making dishes like this. All right, I'm going to blow on it still though, because it's still pretty hot.
Okay, go ahead.
So what you're looking for is that nice tenderness throughout the pierogi. Your vegetables will be cooked, and the ground beef almost picks up the creaminess because of that beef broth mixture that we added, that little bit of gravy, which is always a great comfort food, and it's cold outside still. This is a great dish for a family meal on a cool night, even on a summer night. Trust me, I've been there. And it's wonderful because it is so quick and easy, using all of those great pantry staples, whether they're from the shelf, the fridge, or the freezer. It's a great meal to make, quick and easy.
Hi, Emily. A quick question. For those of us who maybe only have 1 or 2 people in the household, this looks like a really large portion. Could you either freeze half of it as it's completely cooked, or could you easily divide the recipe in half?
The recipe actually is divisible by half. So I would use a smaller skillet and start with your ½ pound of ground beef. So you could definitely do that for a smaller household. You can also, everything's cooked now, so you can actually portion it out. If there's anyone going into work or kids are back at school and they have access to a microwave, you can portion it out and it'll stay in the fridge for a couple of days, or pop it in the freezer. And the only thing that will happen is you'll get a little bit of extra moisture from the freezer, but it will still taste great. And it's another meal done. This is actually a wonderful one too, if you wanted to, and this is something that for porch drop-offs, if anyone's doing those for dinners, you could just put it into a foil container, wrap it up, say what it is, and then someone can just pop it in the oven at 350, probably take about 15 to 20 minutes to heat through, and dinner's done. So if you have any, family or friends that maybe had a baby, maybe need a hand. It's a great dish to do that with too.
Okay, great. One more question before we go. So if you wanted to switch up the flavor profile and maybe put a different spin on this dish, still using the ground beef and the pierogies and the frozen vegetables, what kind of spices could you add just to switch it up?
You could do anything you want. If you have a great spice cupboard, I have my spice drawer here in front of me. I'm just gonna look at it for inspiration, but you could do a little bit of a nacho inspired one or chili inspired one and use chili pepper. You could use a little bit of cumin with that, which would be absolutely delicious. If you wanted to change things up and use a little bit of curry powder, that would be delicious in here as well. And the dry herbs, because I did use dried thyme and sage, you can stick with a similar amount with all of those dried herbs and spices. If it's chili, however, you can maybe pump it up a little bit and give it a little bit more spice. If you wanted heat, so the heat of hot pepper flakes would be really nice in here. You could add a pinch to this, or cayenne pepper would be delicious. And if you don't have dried thyme and sage, you could use one or the other. So you could use all dried thyme or all dried sage, or one of my favorite dried herbs, dried oregano. It's a great one to use, or Italian seasoning, which has a mixture of different herbs in it. So it's really whatever you have, again, in that pantry, whatever's in your spice cupboard, pull it out and create your own, because it will have your family spin on it.
That is amazing. As always, what a fabulous cooking demo, giving us ideas. Thank you so much, Emily. We're going to just wrap up with some tips about stocking your pantry and stocking your freezer, your refrigerator. I'm just going to share my screen because we've had some technical difficulties today. So this is all great. Let's just see here. I'm just going to have to leave it like this. Thanks for everyone's patience. So, I mean, in terms of having a well-stocked pantry, some people are concerned that if they don't have a really big kitchen, they don't have a lot of storage space, or if things are going to be really expensive. You know, as Emily said, look for higher priced items on sale in your grocery store, and you don't have to buy everything at once. It's a couple of items that you want to stock up with when shopping. And also, if you purchase versatile items, you can use them multiple ways. And today's recipe is a perfect example. Ground beef and pierogies, how versatile are those two ingredients? And in your pantry, and these are ingredients really that are focused on calcium and protein. So powdered milk, shelf-stable milk, fortified milk alternatives, canned meats, canned fishes like sardines and salmons with the bones. And you have to eat the bones because that's where the calcium is. And we actually have another recipe that we worked on together, Emily and Osteoporosis Canada, where it is salmon cake. So you can find that recipe on the osteoporosis.ca website as well. And of course, dried or canned beans and nut butters, because those ingredients both have calcium and protein, depending on which bean and which nut butter you're getting. And of course, in your refrigerator, you know, milk products, fortified beverages and eggs, and in your freezer, frozen fruits and vegetables, frozen meats and fish, including beef, cheese and milk, which you can freeze. You can freeze a bag of milk in your freezer. You can freeze, as Emily was saying, shredded cheese. I even freeze like a block of cheese and then defrost it, and pierogies and stuffed pasta. And really, this is to help people make sure that they're eating well, they're getting the nutrients that they need daily, and that, you know, sometimes you can't find, you know, especially cooking during COVID, ingredients are not always readily available in the grocery stores. Right, Emily?
That's so true. That really is true. And I think the other thing is, I mentioned it in the beginning, that whole planning process. Take the time to look at the recipes, check out Osteoporosis Canada, check out thinkbeef.ca, check out and pick some recipes, and then make a grocery list. And if you know that your family's going to love these dishes, like my family loves this one, if they're on sale, buy multiples so that you can make it in a few days or next week, so that you can kind of bulk up. Now, obviously, if you have little space, as Tracie was mentioning, in your freezer and your fridge, you kind of need to plan accordingly. But once it's there, use it, because we all want to eat delicious food and we all want wonderful recipes.
Wonderful. All right, Emily. Well, for more information, you can visit the osteoporosis.ca website. You can calculate your calcium. It's a great tool. It's on the website. You can find other OC recipes. You can take your quiz for the Know Your Risk quiz. And as I mentioned earlier, you're going to be able to watch this video again on the OC Replay webpage. Just give us 48 hours to get it up. And a big thank you to our partners for today, to thinkbeef.ca, and of course to Emily for hosting another informative and fun cooking demo. And we want to thank you. We want to thank everyone who's watching on Facebook Live. Until next time, thank you for joining us. Please stay connected and stay informed. And you can follow Osteoporosis Canada on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And we wish you all a happy and healthy day. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.